Hello, dear listeners. I'm your host, Genevieve Hopkins, and welcome to episode 33 of the Wheel and Cross podcast. Summer is ending in my region with a hot and hazy finale before the season turns towards the cooler months of autumn. The plants are busy putting in their final show of growth, and our garden denizens are busy stockpiling supplies for winter. The bees are engrossed in collecting nectar, and as the summer nectar flows wind down, beekeepers are planning or have already finished their last honey harvests for the season. Honey has an ancient and interesting history. Humans have used it for thousands of years, not only as a food source, but also as an alcoholic drink, a medicine, a religious offering, and a symbol of royalty and wisdom. In this episode, we'll explore the history of humans' use of honey and how honey and bees are featured in European folk tales and mythologies. This podcast is free, but if you like my work, please consider subscribing to the Wheel and Cross Substack page, www.wheelandcross.substack.com. I would also appreciate your reviews on any of the podcasting platforms you use. Feel free to share this podcast and leave comments on the podcast page. Welcome to episode 33 of the Wheel and Cross podcast. Summer's End, the last honey harvests. As always, I would like to acknowledge the custodians of these lands on which I work and live in Australia's capital region, the lands of the Ngunnawal and Ngambri people, and I pay my deep respects to their elders past and present, and to all First Nations and First People across Australia. The earliest evidence of honey used by humans comes from rock art in Spain, India, Australia, and southern Africa, created in the Upper Paleolithic period some 25,000 years ago. It's more than likely that our hominid ancestors collected and ate honey. Even our cousins the primates have been documented collecting honey from hives in the wild. A 10,000-year-old rock art from the Araña caves in Spain depicts people collecting honey from wild bee nests high up on a cliff face. Some cultures still practice this type of honey hunting, such as the Gurung people in Nepal. Although bees have never been domesticated, humans learned to manage them to more easily steal their wax and honey by creating man-made hives and developing beekeeping practices. These practices first appeared 8,500 years ago in Anatolia, or modern-day Turkey, and became widespread across Eurasia by 5,500 BCE. Evidence from written documentation, as well as beehives made from pottery, indicates that beekeeping evolved on an industrial scale in ancient civilizations such as Egypt, Sumer, Assyria, Babylonia, the Hittite kingdom, and as far east as China. Honey was particularly important in ancient Egypt. It was found in ancient Egyptian tombs, where it was used as a gift to the gods and as an ingredient in embalming fluid. The ancient Egyptians also used honey as a sweetener and as a medicine for various ailments. The bee was a symbol of the pharaohs and featured frequently in hieroglyphics. The Egyptian goddess Neith, which means Great Mother of the Sun and Mother of all gods, was known as Mut Neith, the bee, and her temple was called the House of the Bee. The ancient Greeks and Romans also valued honey for its nutritional and medicinal properties. They used honey to make cakes, cheeses, wines, and meads. They also offered honey to their gods and goddesses, particularly Zeus, Apollo, Artemis, and Aphrodite. Honey was associated with wisdom, poetry, and love in Greek and Roman mythology. For example, Zeus was fed with honey as a baby by the nymph Melissa, meaning bee in Greek. The Melissae were considered bee nymphs in ancient Greek mythology and priestesses of various Greek goddesses in historical attestations. Apollo was the god of beekeeping and honey. Artemis was sometimes depicted with a bow and arrows made of beeswax, and Aphrodite was said to have been born from the sea foam mixed with honey. In Central Europe, before the art of beekeeping became commonplace, farmers marked trees that contained hives to indicate their right to the honey in them. Some began to hollow out holes in the highest and straightest trees, climbing up to collect the honey. The old Russian name for a bee man was drevolaziku, which means tree climber, and the Lithuanian bitkopis, which means bee climber. As suitable trees around settlements became scarcer, hollowed-out logs were hung in trees and eventually placed on the ground, either horizontally or perpendicularly, in forest clearings. These hollowed-out logs are still used as hives in part of Germany, Poland, Letland and Russia, and are called Klotzebut in German. Slavic culture has many superstitions surrounding the keeping of the bees. Bees were believed to be the purest beings, the only creatures whose soul the devil can't corrupt, and beehives are the only place where the devil cannot hide. Even if the devil did somehow manage to hide in a beehive, Saint Elijah, an important Slavic saint, would never strike the beehive with his lightning, not even to kill the devil. Similarly, Slavs believed that lightning never strikes a tree with a beehive in it. In the Balkans, it is believed that to ensure success, a new beekeeper must start with 3 beehives. One found, containing a wild swarm, one received as a present, and one stolen. It was considered very bad luck to sell bees. Horse skulls were often placed on top of beehives to protect bees from pests and diseases. When a beekeeper died, it was important that the family or a neighbour inform the bees of their master's death, which is a custom found throughout Europe, known as telling the bees. Often the bees were begged not to leave themselves and were even invited to the funeral, or food and drink from the funeral was left by the hive. The hive was also rotated to face the funeral procession and draped with a mourning cloth. It was important for the beekeeper to give bees away before they died, to ensure the bee colony's prosperity, as it was believed that bee colonies still belonging to the dead beekeeper would also soon die. It was also a common Slavic belief that the soul of the deceased migrated into a bee, meaning that humans and bees have the same souls. This is reflected in South Slavic languages, where the word uginuti means to die, but is only used for animals, while the word umreti also means to die, but is only used for people and bees. The first splinter made during the cutting of the banyak, or the Yule log, usually a young oak tree, is collected and usually placed next to the beehives to ensure fertility and prosperity. Another splinter was put into the Christmas cake, sesnica, and some of the sesnica dough was smeared on beehives to ensure the health and prosperity of the bees. Paraphrased from Old European Culture blogspot. Tree log hives were commonly used across Europe until the skep hive became more popular. Beekeepers in northern Europe transitioned from using logs to skeps around 800 to 12,000 AD. Skep hives are familiar to many through the high and folk art of the Middle Ages, where their popularity was at its peak. They were initially made from wicker and daubed with clay or cow dung, but eventually were made primarily from woven straw. The word skep itself is derived from an Old Norse word skepa, meaning basket. Skeps were often stored and protected from the elements in a skep house or a bee bowl that stood alone or formed part of a stone or brick wall. During the Middle Ages, beekeepers predominantly used skeps as their beehives. These dome-shaped baskets were effective and affordable, but they had limitations. Beekeepers couldn't easily inspect the colony, making disease control difficult. Harvesting honey from a skep often meant destroying the hive, because beekeepers had to cut open the skep to access the honeycomb. Skeps remained popular until the mid-1800s, when the industrial Langstroth hive was invented, which allowed for easier honey harvesting and bee inspection. Honey was an important source of food and medicine in medieval Europe. It was used to make breads, pastries, preserves, and beverages. It was also used to treat wounds, infections, coughs, sore throats, and digestive problems. Honey was considered a sacred substance by the Christian Church, and beeswax was used to make candles for religious ceremonies. Candles for secular use were otherwise made from beef tallow. Honey and bees also feature strongly in Western, Northern, and Eastern European folktales and legends. In Northern European and Norse mythology, bees were connected to the goddess Freyja, who was the patron of love, fertility, and beauty. She was said to cry tears of gold that turned into bees when they touched the earth. Bees were also symbols of wisdom and eloquence, as they produced mead, the drink of poets and scholars. Bee swarms were connected to the Valkyries, according to folklorist Hilda Ellis Davidson. An Anglo-Saxon charm for taking a swarm of bees refers to the bees as Sigurif, victory women, and this seems likely to have been a name for Valkyries, who, like insects, moved in troops through the air to accomplish this purpose. In Celtic mythology, bees were seen as travellers between worlds, bringing messages from the gods and the ancestors. They were also associated with druidic knowledge and magic, as well as healing and prosperity. Honey was used in many rituals and ceremonies, such as blessing newborns, weddings, and funerals. Mead is one of the oldest alcoholic beverages in the world, dating back to at least 7000 BC. It is made from fermenting honey with water, sometimes with added fruits, spices, herbs, or grains to enhance the flavour. Mead was widely consumed in ancient times, especially in Europe, Asia, and Africa, and was considered a sacred drink by many ancient cultures, such as the Greeks, Romans, Egyptians, Celts, and Norse. One of the most fascinating aspects of mead is its role in Norse mythology. The Norse believed that their gods were avid drinkers of mead, which gave them immortality, strength, and wisdom. Mead was also associated with poetry and magic, as it was said to be brewed from the blood of a god named Kvasir, who was the wisest of all beings. According to Norse mythology, Kvasir was created by the gods as a symbol of peace after a war between the two groups of gods, the Aesir and the Vanir. Kvasir travelled around the world, teaching wisdom to everyone he met. However, he was killed by two dwarves named Fjalar and Galar, who wanted to keep his wisdom for themselves. They drained his blood into 3 vessels, a cauldron called Odrerir, and 2 vats called Boden and Son. They mixed his blood with honey and made a mead that could turn anyone who drank it into a poet or a scholar. The dwarves also killed a giant named Gilling and his wife by tricking them into drowning and crushing them with a millstone. Gilling's son, Suttungr, learned of their deeds and sought revenge. He captured the dwarves and threatened to kill them unless they gave him the mead as compensation. The dwarves agreed, and Suttungr took the mead to his home in the mountains of Nipbjörg. He entrusted his daughter Gunnlod to guard it. Odin heard about the mead and decided to get it for himself. He disguised himself as a mortal named Volverk and went to work for Suttungr's brother Baugi, who owned 9 slaves. Odin offered to do the work of all 9 slaves in exchange for a sip of the mead. Baugi agreed, but he did not know where Suttungr hid the mead. Odin suggested that they should drill a hole in the mountain and see if they could find it. Odin used his magic spear Gungnir to make a hole in Nipbjörg. Then he turned into a snake and slithered through the hole, where he found Gunnlod guarding the mead in a chamber inside the mountain. Odin charmed her with his words and seduced her, then persuaded her to let him drink from each vessel of mead. 1 sip from Odrerir, 1 sip from Boden, and 1 sip from Son. However, his sips were so large that he completely emptied each vessel. Odin then turned into an eagle and flew away with the mead in his mouth. Suttungr saw him escaping and also turned into an eagle to chase him. A furious aerial battle ensued between the 2 gods. Odin managed to reach Asgard, where he spat out the mead into several vats. Some drops of the mead fell on Midgard, the world of humans, where they became the inspiration for the Skald, Norse bards or poets. Odin shared the mead with the other gods and with some chosen humans who were worthy of his gift. He became known as the god of poetry and wisdom, as well as war and death. Mead became a symbol of divine power and knowledge. Mead also played an important role in Norse culture and society. It was used as a drink of hospitality, friendship, and alliance. It was served at weddings, funerals, festivals, and ceremonies. It was also offered to honor the ancestors and the gods. Mead was believed to enhance courage, creativity, and eloquence among those who drank it. Many Old Norse festivals, such as Midsummer's Eve and Yule, feature mead as part of their rituals and traditions. Many meaderies produce different varieties of mead, using local honey and natural ingredients. Mead is still drunk by many people to this day and is growing in popularity once more. For many, it is more than just a drink. Mead is a liquid history of human civilization, a nectar of the gods, and a source of poetic inspiration. Next week, we'll begin our series of autumnal episodes by exploring the hedgerow and the hedgerow harvest. Until then, here is the last verse of a poignantly uplifting poem, Telling the Bees, by 19th century American writer Eugene Field. O gentle bees, I have come to say that grandfather fell asleep today, and we know by the smile on grandfather's face he has found his dear one's biding place. So bees sing soft and bees sing low, as over the honey fields you sweep. To the trees abloom and the flowers ablow, sing of grandfather fast asleep. And ever beneath these orchard trees, find cheer and shelter, gentle bees. See you next week for the start of our autumn and harvest season episodes with episode 34, The Hedgerow Harvest.